Well, I realize the hazards of economic forecasting. I think Christina Romer, when the stimulus was first proposed, said that unemployment would be down around 6% the first quarter of 2012. Obviously, that wasn't correct. So, but let me just ask you some things that might affect the unemployment rate. First of all, 8.3% unemployment. But what is the does the Federal Reserve project the real unemployment rate to be, including people who've given up looking for jobs and people who are underemployed? What would that rate be?
We don't make projections specifically of those, but I take your point. It's very important to look not just at the unemployment rate, which reflects only people who are actively seeking work, but there are also a lot of people who are either out of the labor force because they don't think they can find work, and that's a significant number of people. There are also a lot of people who are working but part-time, and they'd like to be working full-time, but they can't find full-time work. So the 8.3% no doubt understates the weakness of the labor market in some broad sense. But on the other hand, all these various measures of unemployment have been improving, but of course these broader measures are definitely higher.
Let me ask you about what's happening in Europe. Is Europe in recession right now?
Well, certainly the southern countries, including the ones that are under a lot of fiscal pressure, have been contracting. And generally speaking, Europe as a whole was growing essentially at a zero rate in the second half of last year. So certainly parts of Europe are in recession. Whether the whole Eurozone goes into recession remains to be seen. The ECB itself has predicted a mild recession and has warned that this might occur. So we think that's a possibility, but the severity and length of it remains at this point uncertain.
And that's an important question or issue because Europe buys a lot of exports from the United States, which is an important part of our gross domestic product, correct?
We have already seen some decline in exports to Europe, although exports to Europe are about 2% of our GDP, and so it's not totally make or break, but it is obviously an influence.
In addition to exports, which give us an indication of what our economic growth will be and job creation, you'd also have to calculate in real consumer household income, which is actually down, I think, lowest since 1995. Is that correct, to your recollection?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, real income, household income was basically flat, very close to flat over 2011, and households are quite pessimistic about their future income.
And they've actually, because they've actually seen increased costs of goods through commodity prices, food, fuel, things like that. They've seen slight increases in taxes from, if you combine state, local, and federal taxes. They've seen higher health insurance costs. All of those things have a depressing effect on consumer spending and on growth of GDP, don't they?
Yes, that's correct, although the real income numbers I gave take into account all of those things except for the health care expenses.
And then there's well-intentioned government policies, and I'll talk briefly, I mentioned briefly the 100% depreciation that expires in 2011 for capital investment. Isn't it reasonable to conclude that businesses that could make that kind of capital investment would take advantage of that 100% depreciation, which expires at the end of this year, which would make it less likely we'd see an increase in capital investment next year because businesses would have already taken advantage of that policy in 2011.
We would expect to see some time shifting up, and this is one more element of this very big change in fiscal stance that takes place in 2013 that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So all of those things taken together, lower capital spending, lower consumer spending growth, declining exports, and spending drag from all levels of government, all those would tend to have a negative impact on unemployment projections. In other words, it would make it tougher for the economy to grow and create jobs rather than easier, correct?
That's why we continue to forecast a moderate recovery as opposed to one that would, quickly undo the damage of the recession.